Perfect. So we're going to be talking about emergency preparedness, specifically environmental preparedness. So safety in a nutshell is all about being prepared. Conducting pre-job safety assessments, inspecting offices and job sites while work is happening, ensuring machinery is inspected and maintained are a few ways we do our best to prevent incidents. But what about the weather? How our environment changes is completely out of our control. So don't let the weather cause long-term destructions on your construction site. Being prepared means having your equipment and workers ready for anything from a sudden rainstorm to freezing temperatures. These changes in weather are especially frequent in Saskatchewan. Preparing your construction site will reduce delays and prevent worker injuries. Construction site weather safety considers factors outside the site as well as maintaining safe conditions inside the work area. So we're going to go through some emergency preparedness legislation and a few other things here. So let's start with section 19.1 and read up as to where the law speaks to training for emergency preparedness. So in 19.1, an employer shall ensure that a worker is trained in all matters that are necessary to protect the health and safety of a worker when the worker, A, begins work at a place of employment, or B, is moved from one work activity or work site to another that differs with respect to hazards, facilities, or procedures. 2, the training required by subsection 1 must include A, procedures to be taken in the event of a fire or other emergency. We'll stop there on the legislation side of that. When you train workers, you want to ensure they are competent, and the legislation defines competency as a combination of knowledge, training, and experience. So it's not just important to tell your workers exactly what they must do during an emergency, but you have to practice it. Let everyone gain experience in what to do during an event before a surprise emergency forces them to act. It's all about those drills and skills. So I had mentioned in the last slide here, other emergency, as stated in the legislation, seems rather vague, and I kind of suppose it is. You know your job the best, so you should be aware of what weather-related hazards can affect you or your workers on your job site. Your location, the hazards involved, seasons, and how they're affected by the weather are all to be taken into account. Thunderstorms, extreme cold or heat, high winds, flooding are all examples of emergencies we need to prepare for, and thanks to modern day forecasting, we have a fairly good idea of when and where these emergencies will happen. Emergency preparedness means making sure you have the resources to deal with emergencies in the workplace. So take the time before an emergency to identify hazards your company may face. Be confident that you have the right equipment, materials, training, and procedures to respond properly. In the last slide, I spoke about being prepared before an emergency takes place. Sometimes our mind gets away from us and we can ask some pretty creative what ifs that could lead to quite a long list that may start to land vastly outside your company's scope of work. This isn't a bad thing at all. We should be considering things that could happen to our workers in any potential environment they can be placed in during the course of their duties. And after all, as a company owner or supervisor, you have a legal obligation to train your workers and inform them of hazards. Although I would never discourage a company from writing a preparedness plan for what to do in case of a meteor shower, I would spend my time on preparing procedures for possible thunderstorms. In section 22, under the Occupational Health and Safety Program, 22.1b and c states in 22.1, subject to subsection 2, an occupational health and safety program required by section 13 of the Act must include, in B, the identifications of existing and potential risks to the health and safety of workers at the place of employment and the measures, including procedures to respond to an emergency that will be taken to reduce, eliminate, or control those risks. And in C, the identification of internal and external resources, including personnel and equipment that may be required to respond to an emergency. What this tells us is that the legislation not only tells us we have to train our employees on the what ifs, but we also have to train them with written down in our occupational health and safety program. So now we know that it's mandated by law to ensure our workers are trained in the company's emergency procedures that are within our safety program. But where else is it mandated that we prepare for other emergencies? The Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association's audit tool has some very specific sections on emergency preparedness. Let's take a few minutes to look into what the audit tool is asking for. The audit tool covers areas on emergency preparedness in section 11. Remember in the start of the presentation, we spoke on how you know your scope of work the best, and we have a responsibility to train your workers and ensure they practice emergency drills. The National Standard Core Program audit tool is looking for exactly that. In 11.1, they ask, are the emergency preparedness plans appropriate to work activities? For this, the auditor must judge if emergency plans are appropriate based on the company's scope of work, size of company, physical locations, number, frequency of personnel, etc. The auditor not only needs to see that the documentation is appropriate, but needs to see that you have taken the appropriate measures to protect your staff. In 11.2, it asks, does the plan include a requirement for training in emergency procedures, roles, and responsibilities? The emergency procedure or policy must assign specific roles and responsibilities to personnel. So the workers, supervisors, subcontractors, etc. And provide appropriate training regarding emergency response plans. The emergency response policy must clearly state that the training will be provided. The auditor will also verify this through interviews that worker and supervisors are aware of their specific responsibilities, roles during an emergency. So let's spend a little bit of time on these two specific questions. So when it comes to your work activities, some questions you should be asking yourself. Do we work mainly inside or outside? If you only lay flooring in residential homes, having a policy for when to shut down a roof sheathing job due to high winds won't necessarily be required in your manual, as it does not fit your scope of work. Do we work in the city or outside the city? So for example, if you build homes on acreages or farms, you may not have somewhere to shelter away from a storm. This is something that has to be considered and prepared for. Is our work seasonal or do we work all year round? Working seasonally means that if you only do roofing from May to September, you may not require an emergency procedure for snowstorms. However, a policy on wind speed should be included. How many people are on site at any given time? Do you have enough room for all the workers in case of weather-related incident? What about a flash storm that rolls in? Can you shelter everyone? When it comes to creating these procedures, you know your company's scope the best, and we've spoken about that. You need to ask, what possible weather-related incidents can negatively affect my workforce, and how can I better prepare them to act in case they do happen? These are just a few questions to ask when deciding if you meet the criteria asked in 11.1 with the core audit tool for weather-related emergency preparedness. So 11.2 asks a question about training and emergency procedures, roles, and responsibilities. When it comes to weather-related emergencies, it's very important to know who will be on your sites. Subtrades, workers, supervisors, superintendents all have different roles and priorities. On your site, supervisors may be in charge of headcounts by referencing sign-in books or directing trades as a fire captain. And superintendents may have other priorities like contacting emergency help or nearby sites or coordinating with trade partners. And I mean, keep in mind, these are, I'm speaking on large jobs. It all differentiates between large and small jobs here. Some jobs may not have a superintendent and only have a supervisor. When it comes to the subcontractors, you need to coordinate, between each company, as they all have different scopes of work and may require extra steps to ensure a safe response to an emergency. Coordination and communication between companies is key, and you need to organize and compare response plans. Ensure you have a program in place for training, not only during your company orientation, but also your site orientation, as it's imperative to emergency response system effectiveness for everyone on site. So now you have all your roles and responsibilities figured out for everyone on site, and your procedures are written that fit your scope of work. There is one very important step that cannot be overlooked. You need to test your emergency response plans. So when we go back to the audit tool, 11.3 asks, has the emergency response plan been tested for deficiencies and corrective action taken? This requires physically running through the emergency response plans on your job site or at your office and documenting the process. Does everyone know their job? Did they perform it correctly? What was the response time? Did we go to the proper muster point? Did everyone sign in upon arrival to the job site relative to the head count? Do alarm systems work? Were they in proper locations? Was communication sufficient? These are all the types of issues you'll be looking at to correct or improve upon during the documented system. Records must indicate the results of the test and what corrective actions were taken to correct the deficiencies. For example, on a large site, you may find that sounds from an air horn blown from the site trailer does not carry far enough to be heard on the other side of the job site. This would be noted during the test and corrective actions would be taken. This was a real situation during a large commercial build of a school. The corrective action was to implement a relay system in which an air horn was given 3 long blasts every 30 seconds until the next air horn was heard that was placed in the center of the job site. This was so that everyone could hear the air horn no matter where they were on the job. This increased the effectiveness of the emergency response system for the remaining duration of the job. So, where to go? Part of your orientation training should include a map of where your designated muster points are. The training should include how you communicate, which specific muster point workers will go to, depending on the type of emergency. On this map, there are 2 separate muster points. The muster point with the green and yellow star is the main muster point. The signal for workers to go to this muster point will be 3 long air horn blasts. The red and yellow star is for weather emergencies. The signal for workers to go to this muster point will be 3 short blasts from the air horn every 10 seconds. From there, workers will be protected from the elements due to the completion stage of this building. You may think that this is too confusing. However, training given during the orientation would explain the system to the workers. Then, periodically, through testing the emergency response system, you can determine how effective your training is and if you need to practice the emergency system more often to ensure that all workers remember the alarm signals. Again, this is all drills and skills. This is the best way to ensure that all your workers know what to do in case of an emergency. So, weather preparedness. So this section of the presentation will not be an entire guide to everything to look out for during a weather emergency. However, this will give you some idea on what to include in your procedures. Remember, if you're having trouble with the creation of these procedures, or you just need a little guidance, the advisory services team can help you out. So, thunder, lightning, and hail. Thunderstorms are often accompanied by high winds, hail, lightning, heavy rain, and in cases can produce tornadoes. Hail is formed when updrafts and thunderclouds carry raindrops upward into extremely cold areas of the atmosphere where they freeze and merge into lumps of ice. Thunderstorms and lightnings occur throughout Canada, but less frequently in the north. On average, 10 people die each year in Canada, and up to 160 are injured during such storms. Thunderstorms are usually over within an hour, although a series of thunderstorms can last several hours. Hailstorms occur across Canada, mostly from May to October. They are most frequent in Alberta, southern prairies, and in southern Ontario. Some hailstones are the size of peas, while others can be as big as grapefruits. Hail comes down at great speed, especially when accompanied in high winds, and that can cause serious injuries and damage. So remember to include in your policy what to do if you're outside during one of these weather events. Some policies include the amount of time you must wait from the last rumble or thunder before everyone can go back to work. This is important detail in the responsibilities of your policy, especially who gets to decide when you go back to work. Tornadoes are nature's most violent storms. Spawned from powerful thunderstorms, tornadoes can cause fatalities and devastate neighborhoods in seconds. A tornado appears in a rotating, funnel-shaped cloud that extends from a thunderstorm to the ground with whirling winds that can reach 300 miles per hour. Damage paths can be in the excess of 1 mile wide and 50 miles long. Some tornadoes are clearly visible, while rain or nearby low-hanging clouds obscure others. Occasionally, tornadoes develop so rapidly that little, if any, advance warning is possible. Before a tornado hits, the wind may die down and the air may become very still. Tornadoes generally occur during the trailing edge of a thunderstorm. It's not uncommon to see clear, sunlit skies behind a tornado. When you think of tornadoes, you're probably more likely to think of Bill Paxton than Saskatchewan. However, in Saskatchewan, there were 13 tornadoes by July in 2019. The province averages 18 per year. A tornado that flattened a northwest Saskatchewan campground on June 29, 2019 was rated by Environment Canada as an EF1. Tornado is rated EF1 when it reaches winds of 138 to 177 kilometers per hour and causes moderate damage. The highest rating is in EF5. It is vital to have procedures that outline what to do if you are in a structure or outside with no shelter. Communication before and after an event, such as a tornado, is crucial to preparedness. Flooding. So floods are the most frequent natural hazard in Canada. They can occur at any time during the year and are most often caused by heavy rainfall, rapid melting of a thick snow ice pack, ice jams, or more rarely, the failure of a natural or man-made dam. The heavy rainfall can result in flooding, particularly when the ground is still frozen or already saturated from previous storms. Flash flooding, in which warning time is extremely limited, can be caused by hurricanes, violent storms, or dams breaking. Many Canadian rivers experience flooding at one time or another. Potential for flood damage is high where the development on low-lying, flood-prone lands. For those that remember, July 2016, Estevan, Saskatchewan was hit with over 130 millimeters of rain in just over 2 hours. This can happen extremely fast. It's important to know how to prepare for floods if one is forecast or imminent. Your procedures should also cover what to do if you need to evacuate and what to do after a flood. Re-entering a work site to dewater and ensuring building safety should be covered as well, as most companies do handle this part themselves on site. Winter preparedness. Severe storms are events that can affect all communities and construction sites at any time within Saskatchewan. Environment Canada tracks all weather systems in order to mitigate their potential effects, but some severe storms can strike without notice and have long-lasting effects in our region. They can take on many forms: thunderstorms, hail, blizzards, ice storms, and heavy rain, developing quickly and threatening life and property. Your policy should include what to do when a winter storm approaches and when it may be time to pack up and head home. Like any storm, there are levels to each one, and some may not be as extreme as others. Generally speaking, winter storms are predictable, but you should still be prepared and know what to do in case one surprises you. When it comes to the cold, the legislation has some key pieces of information that you should make sure are covered in your policies and procedures. When working alone or traveling, you need to be prepared for the cold temperatures. In working alone or at isolated places of employment, Section 35(4)(b)(6) states that you need to ensure that there's a provision for emergency supplies for use in traveling under conditions of extreme cold and other inclement weather conditions. Section 70 goes over thermal conditions and speaks to monitoring thermal conditions, providing shelter, heating and cooling equipment, provision of hot or cold drinks, limited work schedules with rest and recovery periods, frequent observation of workers by a person trained to recognize the symptoms of psychological stress resulting from extreme temperatures, and again, the provision and emergency supplies for use when traveling under extremely cold or inclement weather conditions. There are apps that have been created to help us stay connected and prepared. One of them is the Government of Saskatchewan's Emergency Alerts app. It's a free app that can be downloaded from the Apple Store or Google Play. Sask Alert is the Government of Saskatchewan's emergency public alerting program that provides critical information on emergencies in real time so that you can take action to protect yourself, your family, and your property. Alerts can be issued by Environment Canada, Government of Saskatchewan ministries, crowns and agencies, as well as participating municipalities and First Nations. Weather alerts, which are issued by Environment Canada, may include tornadoes, watches and warnings, and any warnings issued for blizzard, blowing snow, dust storms, extreme cold, freezing drizzle, freezing rain, heat, rainfall, severe thunderstorms, snowfall, wind, and winter storms. Alerts issued by the province as well as by local municipalities and First Nations may include wildfires, flooding, train derailments, power outages, drinking water advisories, local emergency declarations, community outages, road closures, and evacuations. Critical emergency alerts can be received through all radio and TV broadcasters licensed to operate in Saskatchewan by wireless alerting to your mobile device through the Sask Alert website, the Sask Alert app, and the Weather Network. Advisory emergency alerts can be received through the saskalert.ca website, the Sask Alert app, and the Weather Network. So the SCSA has also created a medical facilities locator that you can use your cell phone location to find facilities near you. this can be a very valuable system in setting up your emergency response system. A great thing that we do often is for every job, you set up an emergency listing with the nearest hospital. So this can be a great app to use if you're in a location that's not necessarily familiar to you, to where you can find your nearest locations. Max Mayfield is an American meteorologist who served as the director of the National Hurricane Center from 2000 to 2007. He had once said that preparation through education is less costly than learning through tragedy. Having a plan that your worksite is trained in, has practiced, and that is effective brings you one step closer to mitigating the potential expense. Financial impact a weather-related incident can cause to a construction site is potentially very high, but an injury or death that could have been prevented with proper planning is the ultimate price. So again, if you have any questions about creating your emergency preparedness system, please feel free to speak to an advisor.